I have told families that their loved ones are gone more times than I can count. I have looked fathers in the eye and said the words. I have held the hands of mothers while they collapsed. I have signed death certificates in the middle of the night without flinching. After 23 years of emergency medicine, you develop a kind of professional armor. Not because you stop caring, but because if you let every death reach all the way into you, you will not survive long enough to save the next person. I thought I had that armor. Then a 7-year-old girl named Shirin was carried through my emergency doors on the 4th of March, 2026, and everything I had built over 23 years came apart in less than 48 hours. And in the rubble of everything that fell, I saw a light in the corner of a hospital room that I will spend the rest of my life trying to find words to describe. This is what happened to me 11 days ago. I am Dr. Kamran Tirani. I have worked at the hospital in the Yaftabad district of southwestern Tehran for the past 14 years. Before that, I trained and worked in Isfahan. I have been a physician for 23 years total. Emergency medicine is all I have ever done and all I have ever wanted to do. I will not give the full name of my hospital here because there are colleagues still working inside those walls and I will not do anything that puts them at risk. What I will tell you is that by the time the war began on February the 28th, 2026, our hospital had already been preparing for weeks. We had heard the tension building. We had read the news. We had been receiving quiet instructions from the health ministry about emergency surge protocols and resource management. But nothing, no protocol, no preparation, no instruction from any ministry prepares you for what actually walks through your doors when a war of this scale begins. From the 1st of March, the patients did not stop coming. Burns, blast injuries, crush wounds from collapsed buildings. People who had been pulled from rubble with broken bones and punctured lungs and internal bleeding that had been slowly happening inside them for hours before anyone found them. Children who had been separated from their families and brought in by strangers. Elderly people with no identification, no family member present, no one to speak for them. Our wards filled, then our corridors filled. Then we were putting people on mattresses on the floor of rooms that were designed for storage. I was sleeping in my office. Not every night. Some nights I did not sleep at all. I would work until my hands started making small errors and then I would go to my office and lie down on the small couch I had pushed against the wall years ago for exactly this kind of situation and close my eyes for 2 or 3 hours and then get up and go back. My nurses were doing the same. My fellow doctors were doing the same. We were all running on something that was not quite energy anymore. Something closer to pure stubbornness. The refusal to stop while there was still someone who needed us. I had stopped counting the days. I had stopped thinking about anything beyond the next patient, the next decision, the next hour. That is the only way to survive a situation like that. You shrink your world down to what is directly in front of you, and you do not look at the full picture, because the full picture will destroy you. That is the state I was in when Shirin arrived. It was the evening of March the 4th, close to 9 o'clock at night. I was in the middle of assessing a man in his 50s, with a serious chest wound, when my senior nurse Parisa came to find me with that particular expression on her face that I have learned over 14 years means. This one cannot wait, she said quietly beside my ear. 7-year-old female, brought in by parents. Severe respiratory distress, high fever, altered consciousness. She is not good, doctor. I finished the immediate stabilization on my chest wound patient, handed him to my colleague Dr. Farhad, and moved to the emergency bay where they had brought the girl. The first thing I saw was the mother. She was a woman of perhaps 35, her headscarf half fallen from her hair, her eyes completely wild, with the kind of fear that strips a person down to their most basic self. She was holding the edge of the gurney with both hands, like if she let go the whole world would collapse. Beside her was the father, a quiet man, slightly built, with the look of someone who had decided that holding himself completely rigid was the only way to keep from falling apart entirely. And between them, on the gurney, was Shirin. She was tiny. The way sick children always look smaller than they actually are, as though illness shrinks them. Her face was flushed a deep red from the fever, and her breathing was a sound I have heard too many times. That labored, effortful, desperate sound of lungs working far too hard to do what lungs are supposed to do without effort. Her eyes were open but glassy, moving slowly around the room with the unfocused look of a child who is present but not fully present. And then her eyes found her mother's face, and she said in a voice so small I had to lean forward to hear it, "Maman, am I going to die?" The mother's face did the thing that faces do when a person is trying with everything they have not to break down in front of their child. She pressed her lips together and stroked the girl's hair and said, "No, my love. No, you are not going to die. The doctor is here. The doctor will help you." The girl's eyes moved from her mother's face to mine. She looked at me for a moment with those glassy, feverish eyes. I gave her what I have given hundreds of children in that situation. A calm, confident smile. The smile that says everything is under control even when you are not yet sure that it is. I got to work. What Shirin had was a severe case of pneumonia that had progressed to what we call acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, in a healthy child with access to full medical resources. This is already a serious and dangerous condition, in a hospital that was overcrowded and under-resourced in the middle of a wartime emergency, in a city that had been under military strikes for less than a week, with supply chains disrupted and staff stretched beyond their limits. It was a condition that made my jaw tighten the moment I reviewed her initial assessments. Her oxygen saturation levels were dangerously low. Her lungs were significantly compromised. She had a secondary bacterial infection running alongside the ARDS that was putting additional strain on a small body that was already using everything it had just to keep breathing. We put her on respiratory support immediately. We started her on the strongest antibiotic protocol we had available. We moved her to our pediatric critical care area, which at that point was so full that we had created a sectioned off space in what used to be a consultation room. I ordered every intervention that was appropriate for her condition. My team responded without hesitation. These were exhausted people working at the edge of their capacity, and they gave that little girl everything they had. Her parents were in the corridor outside. I came out to speak to them after the first hour of treatment. The mother grabbed my arm before I had finished my first sentence. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She said, "Please, doctor, she is all we have. She is our only child. Please." I told her what I always tell parents in that moment, that we were doing everything possible, that she was receiving the best care we could give her, that we were watching her closely. I told her to try to rest if she could. I told her we would update them regularly. The father thanked me in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He had the Quran in his hands, a small worn copy that looked like it had been read thousands of times. He said he would keep praying. I told him that was good. What I did not tell them was what I had already seen in her numbers. What I did not tell them was the conversation I had with my colleague Dr. Nasreen in the corridor about 20 minutes later, where we both looked at Shirin's initial results and spoke in the quiet, professional code that doctors use when the news is very bad and the family is nearby. Nasreen said, "She is fighting hard." I said, "Yes." We looked at each other. We both knew what the numbers were saying underneath the fighting. Through the night of March the 4th and into the 5th, Shirin held on. I checked on her every few hours between other cases. Each time I came in, her parents were there. The mother on one side, the father on the other, the worn Quran open in his hands. At some point, in the early hours of March the 5th, I passed the corridor outside her room. and heard the low murmur of Quranic recitation coming from behind the door, the father reading healing verses over his daughter in the dark. I stood in that corridor for a moment and listened. I am a Muslim man. I have prayed my whole life. In that moment, hearing that father's voice reading those verses, I felt something I did not fully examine at the time. A sadness that went deeper than professional concern, something personal, something that had to do with faith and what we ask of it and what it gives back. I went back to work and I did not examine that feeling further. By the afternoon of March the 5th, nearly 20 hours after Shirin had been brought in, my team gathered for an honest assessment of her condition. The results were not what we had hoped for. Despite everything we had done, the airless was not responding the way it needed to respond. The infection, though partially controlled, was still active. Her oxygen levels remained critically low and were showing no meaningful improvement. Dr. Nazrin looked at me across the table. Dr. Farhad looked at the numbers in silence. My senior nurse, Parisa, who has been with me for 11 years and who I trust completely, sat with her hands folded and said nothing. I said, "Give me a number." Nasreen said quietly, 5%, maybe less. 5% survival probability. For a 7-year-old girl whose mother was sitting 10 meters away in a corridor reading the Quran. I have given families devastating news many times. I told you that already. I have the professional armor. I know how to do it. Calmly, clearly, compassionately, with the right words in the right order. I have never enjoyed it, but I have never been unable to do it. I walked to the door of my office, put my hand on the handle, and stopped. I could not move. I stood at that door for what must have been 2 full minutes, my hand on the handle, unable to push it open and walk out to where that mother was waiting. Something in me had simply refused. It was not professional hesitation. It was not strategic thinking about how to phrase difficult news. It was weakness. Pure, simple, human weakness. That little girl asking her mother if she was going to die. That grip on my arm in the corridor. She is all we have. I turned around and sat back down at my desk. I did something I had not done in a very long time in a professional context. I prayed, properly, with urgency. I asked Allah to help this child. I asked Him to work in ways that my medicine could not. I told Him that I had given everything I had, and it was not enough, and I needed something beyond what I had. I sat at my desk and I waited. The prayer felt like it went nowhere. That is the only way I can describe it. Not that I stopped believing. I was not yet at the point of theological questioning. Just that the prayer felt like a thing I had said into an empty room, and the room had not responded. I told the nurse on duty to update me immediately on any change in Shirin's condition. Then I sat in my office and I waited for the update that would tell me she was gone. 6 hours passed. I know how long 6 hours is. In a hospital under wartime pressure, 6 hours contains multitudes. Other patients, other emergencies, other decisions. I was not sitting still, but underneath everything I was doing, there was a part of my attention that was waiting for Parisa to appear at my door with that expression on her face that I knew too well. She did not come. 7 hours after the assessment, it was not Parisa who appeared, but a different nurse, a young woman named Golnaz, who had joined our team only 3 months earlier. She knocked on my open office door and said, "Dr. Tehrani, should we continue Shirin's current medication protocol or adjust?" I looked up. Something about the question stopped me. Continue the protocol, present tense, as though there was something to continue. I said, "What is her current status?" Golnaz said, "She has not improved significantly, but she is still breathing. She has not deteriorated further either. She is holding." I was out of my chair before she finished the sentence. I walked into Shirin's room and the first thing I noticed was the quality of the air. I know that sounds strange, but there was something in that room that was different from the air in the rest of the hospital. Quieter somehow. Stiller. Like the room was holding its breath. Shirin was lying exactly as I had last seen her, connected to her monitoring equipment, oxygen support in place. Her parents were both pleasant, the mother seated close to the bed with her hand over her daughter's hand. The father standing at the foot of the bed with the Quran closed now, held against his chest. I checked her monitors. Her numbers were the same, still critical, still far below where they needed to be. But she was holding, against every probability, against every clinical projection my team had made 6 hours earlier. She was still here. I stood beside her bed, and I did what doctors do. I assessed, I checked, I looked at the data. And while I was doing that, without planning to, without deciding to, I spoke, not to the parents, not to the nurses, not really to Allah in the formal sense of prayer. I just said it out loud into the room, into the stillness of that strange quiet air. I said, if there is truly a healer somewhere, please, heal this child. It was not eloquent. It was not structured. It was the most stripped-down, desperate, honest thing I had said in years, maybe in my entire adult life. The prayer of a man who had run completely out of his own resources and was asking for something he could not name and could not explain and was not even fully sure he believed in anymore. And then the corner of the room filled with light. I want to be precise about what I saw because I am a doctor. I have spent 23 years in a profession that is built entirely on observable, measurable, verifiable reality. I do not deal in things I cannot see or touch or test. My entire professional life has been a commitment to evidence. So when I tell you what I saw in the corner of that room, I want you to understand that I am not a man who is prone to imagination, not a man who sees things that are not there, not a man whose mind fills empty spaces with comfortable illusions. What appeared in the corner of Shirin's room on the evening of March the 5th, 2026, was not an illusion. It began as light, but not the light of the fluorescent panels above us that had been humming their cold white light all evening. This was different in a way that is almost impossible to articulate. The best I can say is that the light in that corner had a quality of warmth that no electrical source produces. It was not blinding. It did not make me shield my eyes. It was the kind of light that somehow made everything around it more visible, rather than washing it out, as though the room itself became more real, more present, more solid in the presence of this light, rather than less. I noticed it first in my peripheral vision, a brightening at the corner where the wall met the wall, to the left of the window. I turned my head slowly. I am not sure why slowly. Perhaps some instinct that sudden movement would disturb whatever this was. And standing in that light was a man. I will describe what I saw as plainly as I can. He was robed in white, not the clinical white of hospital garments, but a white that seemed to carry its own luminosity, as though the fabric itself was part of the light rather than simply lit by it. His face, and I have tried many times in the days since to find the right words for his face, and I keep arriving at the same inadequate conclusion. His face was the most peaceful thing I have ever seen in my life, and I have been present at moments of great peace. I have been with patients in their final moments who found a stillness that was beautiful in its completeness. But this was different from all of that. This peace was not the peace of something ending. It was the peace of something that has never been threatened. The peace of something that simply is, fully and completely, without any shadow of doubt or fear or uncertainty. He looked at me. I want to tell you I said something intelligent. I want to tell you that 23 years of professional training and a lifetime of faith gave me some framework for this moment that allowed me to respond with composure. I could not speak. I could not move. I stood beside Shirin's bed with my hand still on her chart, and every system in my body simply stopped its normal operation and redirected everything it had toward trying to process what my eyes were telling it. Then he spoke. His voice, and I have thought about this constantly in the 9 days since it happened, his voice did not come to me the way sound normally comes. Sound travels through air and enters through your ears and your brain processes it. This voice did not travel. It was simply present, inside the room and inside me at exactly the same moment, as though the distance between outside and inside had been temporarily dissolved. He said, "I am the healer." 3 words, but the weight of those 3 words in that room, spoken in that voice, was not the weight of 3 words. It was the weight of something that contained every healing that had ever happened since the beginning of time. As though those 3 words were not a statement being made for the first time, but a truth being uncovered that had always been there, waiting under everything. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He continued, "And what he said next I will give you as faithfully as I am able, because these words have not left me for a single moment across 9 days, and I do not believe they ever will." He said, "I send my word and it heals, not the medicine, not the knowledge of men. The word that I speak over a life is what determines whether that life continues or ends. Your hands are instruments. Your knowledge is a gift I placed in you. But the healing, the true healing, the healing that reaches into the place where disease begins before it ever shows itself in the body, that healing is mine alone." He paused. I felt the pause, the way you feel the moment before lightning, a fullness in the air, a sense of something about to be revealed that cannot be taken back once it is shown. Then he said, "You have cried out tonight, not to the God of your religion. You cried out to the healer. You asked for the real thing. And I am here because I have always been here. I have been here every time one of my children came through those doors. I have been here in every moment when your hands did what your training told them, and life returned against all probability. You called those moments medicine. I called them mercy. I felt something happening in my chest, not a physical sensation, nothing cardiac, nothing I could have measured on any monitor in that room, something deeper than physical, like a door swinging open inside me that I had not known was there." He said, "I am the Son. I am not a prophet among prophets. I am not a teacher among teachers. Before the first teacher drew his first breath, I was. Before the first word of any holy book was written, I was. I am the word itself. I am the one the books were written about, and I am standing in this room tonight because a little girl's life is not finished, and because your life, Kamran, your life is not finished either. Not the life you have been living, the real one, the one I have been waiting to give you." I do not know when I started crying. I became aware of the tears somewhere in the middle of his words. They were simply there, running down my face, and I had no memory of them starting. I am a 61-year-old Iranian physician who has not cried in a professional setting in more than 2 decades. I was standing in my own hospital ward, weeping like a man who had just been told something he had been waiting his whole life to hear, without knowing he was waiting. He looked at me with that face, that completely undisturbed, completely certain, completely loving face. He said, "You have healed many. Now let me heal you." And then he said one more thing. He said it quietly, almost gently, the way you say something to a person you have known for a very long time. He said, "She will live. Go and see." And the light was gone. The room was exactly as it had been. The monitors, the equipment, the hum of the fluorescent lights. The father still standing at the foot of the bed, the mother still seated with her hand over her daughter's hand. I turned toward Shirin's bed. She was sitting up, not slowly, not weakly, sitting up the way children sit up in the morning when they have slept well and their bodies feel good and the day is ahead of them. She was upright, her oxygen support displaced slightly by the movement. Her eyes, those eyes that had been glassy and unfocused and half absent since she arrived, her eyes were clear, completely clear, alert and present and full of the particular brightness of a child who is fully inhabiting her own life. She looked at her mother. Then she looked around the room. Then she looked at me with those bright, clear eyes, and she said, in a voice that carried none of the breathless labor of the past 30 hours, in a voice that was simply a child's ordinary voice, small and direct and entirely certain, "I'm thirsty. Can I have water?" The mother made a sound I cannot transcribe. It was not a word. It was not a scream. It was the sound of a human being receiving something back that they had already accepted was gone. A sound that lives in the space between grief and joy, where language has not yet been built. She grabbed her daughter and pulled her close and held her, and the sound kept coming, and the father dropped to his knees at the foot of the bed and pressed his forehead to the mattress and his shoulders shook. I stood in the middle of all of this, and I was completely still. A nurse appeared at the door. Gonaz, the young one who had come to ask about the medication protocol. She looked at the monitors. She looked at Shirin sitting upright, asking for water. She looked at me. Her face moved through confusion, and then disbelief, and then something that was almost fear in its intensity. She said, "Doctor, her oxygen saturation." I said, "What is it?" She looked at the monitor again, as though she needed to check it twice before she would trust it. She said, 97%, 97%. From the critically low readings of an hour ago, 97%. The reading of a healthy, breathing, fully oxygenated child. I said, "Get her some water." Then I walked out of the room, down the corridor, into my office, and I closed the door. I sat at my desk for a long time. Outside my door, the hospital continued its wartime noise. The movement of trolleys, the voices of staff. Somewhere in the distance, the low sound of what might have been another strike or might have been thunder. The war was still happening. Tehran was still a city under the pressure of something enormous and violent and beyond any individual person's control. Inside my office, there was only silence and the aftermath of what I had just seen and heard. I am a man of science. I have told you that. But I am also a man who has prayed 5 times a day for most of his adult life, who has fasted every Ramadan, who has read the Quran and believed its words and shaped his understanding of God around its teachings. I am not a man who came to this moment empty of faith. I came to it full of a faith that had, in the past 6 days of this war, been stretched and strained and quietly questioned in ways I had not fully admitted, even to myself. And now I was sitting in my office trying to reconcile everything. The reconciliation did not take as long as I might have expected, because here is what I kept returning to. Sitting at that desk on the evening of March the 5th, I had spent 23 years watching people heal and watching people die, and in all of that time I had understood healing as a combination of medicine and the will of Allah. That was my framework. That was how I made sense of the outcomes I could not fully explain medically. The patient who should not have survived their injuries but did, the recovery that went faster than any textbook predicted, the moment when a body simply decided to fight in a way that exceeded all the clinical projections. I had always filed those moments under the broad category of Allah's mercy and moved on. But tonight I had not filed a moment. I had seen a face. I had heard a voice, and the voice had said things that were not compatible with what I had been taught about who God is and how He works, and who stands at the center of the story of healing and salvation. I am the Son. I am not a prophet among prophets. In Islam, Jesus is honored. He is a prophet of great importance. He is given a place of dignity in the Quran. But he is a man, a prophet, one among others. That is what I had been taught from the time I was old enough to understand the religious instruction. What I had seen in that room was not a prophet among others. What I had felt when that voice spoke was not the feeling of receiving wisdom from a great teacher. It was the feeling I imagine you would have if you had been living your whole life looking at photographs of the sun, and then someone opened the door and you saw the actual sun for the first time. The photographs were not wrong. They contained real information, but they were not the thing itself. I sat at my desk and I thought about Shirin, about what her numbers had been an hour ago, about what they were now, about the face of that mother when her daughter asked for water, about what I would have had to tell that family if the morning of March the 6th had gone the way every clinical indicator said it would go. He had said, "I have been here every time one of my children came through those doors." I thought about 23 years of cases, 23 years of outcomes I could not fully explain, 23 years of moments when medicine did its best and something else, something I had never named correctly, did the rest. I thought about the prayer I had prayed in that room, the strict down, desperate, honest prayer. If there is truly a healer somewhere, please, heal this child. I had not prayed to Allah in that moment. I had not used any of the formal language of Islamic prayer. I had simply cried out to whatever was real, to the actual thing rather than the name I had been given for it. And the actual thing had answered. He had said, "You asked for the real thing, and I am here." I put my face in my hands and I sat like that for a long time. Then I did something that felt both completely foreign and completely natural at the same time. I spoke, out loud, into the quiet of my office, not in Arabic, not in the formal, structured language of Salah, in my own voice, in Farsi, in the direct and undecorated language of a man who has just run out of pretense. I said, "I saw you. I heard you. I don't have all the answers yet. I don't know what this means for everything I have believed and everything I have built my life around. But I know what I saw was real, and I know that what you said was true. And I am asking you directly, the way I asked you tonight in that room, to be what you said you are, to me. Not just to Shirin, to me." I paused. Then I said, "I believe you are who you said you are." That was all. It was enough. I went back to Shirin's room an hour later with Dr. Nasrin. I wanted a second pair of eyes on her readings, because part of me, the 23-year physician part, the evidence-based part, needed confirmation that what Gunas had reported was accurate and sustained. Nasrin stood at the monitoring equipment for a long time without speaking. She checked Shirin's breathing. She checked her temperature. She reviewed the readings across the past hour. Shirin was asleep by then, a natural, peaceful sleep, her chest rising and falling with the easy rhythm of a child who is simply resting. Nasrin turned to me. "I have known this woman for 9 years. She is not easily surprised." She said, "Kamran, what happened in here?" I said, "What do the numbers tell you?" She said, "The numbers tell me that this child's condition has improved to a degree that I cannot attach a medical explanation to, not in this time frame, not with this presentation." I said, "Then perhaps the explanation is not a medical one." She looked at me for a long moment. I've never been a man who spoke about spiritual things in professional contexts. 9 years of working alongside me had not prepared her for that sentence coming from my mouth in that tone of voice. She said quietly, "Are you all right?" I said, "I think for the first time in a very long time, I actually am." She did not push further. She wrote her clinical notes. We left the room together. I did not tell her what I had seen that evening. Not yet. There will be a time for those conversations. That night was not it. The next morning, March the 6th, I ran Shearing's full panel again. Her oxygen saturation had held at 96 to 97% through the entire night. Her temperature had normalized. The bacterial infection markers in her blood work had dropped to a level that would have required several more days of aggressive antibiotic treatment to achieve under normal circumstances. Her lung imaging showed improvement that my radiologist colleague described on the phone, in the careful, understated language that doctors use, as unexpectedly encouraging. I stood in the corridor reading that report, and I felt the same thing I had felt in my office the night before. That stillness, that warmth, that sense of a door standing open that I had walked through and could not walk back through even if I wanted to. I did not want to. I went to see Shirin that morning, and she was sitting up in bed eating a small bowl of rice porridge that one of the nurses had brought her, holding the spoon herself, completely focused on her food, with the intense dedication that hungry children bring to eating. Her mother was beside her, watching her daughter eat with an expression on her face that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The expression of a person who has been given back something they had already let go. The mother looked up when I walked in. She stood immediately and reached for my hand and held it in both of hers. She said, "Dr. Tehrani, thank you, whatever you did last night. Thank you." I looked at this woman holding my hand. I thought about what to say. I thought about the clinical language, the professional deflection, the careful framing that keeps doctors at a comfortable distance from the full weight of what happens in their hospitals. I said, "I did not do this." She looked at me. I said, "What happened to your daughter last night was not my medicine. I want you to know that. Whatever you believe, whatever faith you hold, there is a healer who was in this room last night, and it was not me." She did not fully understand what I was saying. That was fine. I was not saying it for her understanding. I was saying it because it was true, and I had decided, somewhere in the hours between the evening of March the 5th and the morning of March the 6th, that I was no longer going to file extraordinary things under ordinary explanations. Shirin was discharged on March the 9th. 4 days after the night she should have died. She walked out of my hospital on her own feet, holding her father's hand on one side and her mother's hand on the other. She was wearing a small yellow coat. She turned at the door and looked back into the ward. I do not know why. Children sometimes do things like that with no explanation. And for a moment her eyes found mine across the distance of the corridor. She smiled at me, a child's simple, uncomplicated smile. Then she turned and walked out into the pale March morning with her parents. I stood in that corridor and watched her go, and I thought about what he had said. Your life is not finished either, not the life you have been living, the real one, the one I have been waiting to give you. I am 61 years old. I have been a doctor for 23 years. I have lived my entire adult life inside the framework of faith that I now understand was pointing towards something it could not fully contain, like a map that shows you the direction, but is not the territory itself. I am still in Tehran as I record this on March the 15th, 2026. I am still working in my hospital because the patients are still coming and I am still a doctor, and that does not change. But something in how I work has changed. Something in what I believe is sustaining what I do has changed. When I stand at a bedside now, and I do everything my training has given me, I know with a certainty I have never had before, that I am not working alone, that there is a healer in the room who has been there all along, whose hands have been working through mine for 23 years without my full knowledge. I know his name now. I have some things I want to say before I close this. To my colleagues in medicine, the doctors and nurses and technicians who are working in hospitals across Iran right now, in conditions that none of us were fully trained for. I see you. I know what this costs. I know what it does to a person to pour everything they have into a situation and still lose people. I want you to know that there is a healer who sees every one of those efforts, every hour you have worked past exhaustion, every family you have sat with in the middle of the night, every patient you could not save and carried home with you in the silence after your shift. He sees all of it, and his capacity to heal goes beyond every limit that our medicine encounters. To the people of Iran, the ordinary people, the families who are not politicians or soldiers or commanders, the people who are simply trying to survive a war they did not choose, I am praying for you, every single one of you. The children especially, the ones in hospitals right now, the ones in courtyards and corridors and makeshift treatment areas across this country. He sees them. He is in those rooms. He has always been in those rooms. To my fellow Muslims, and I say this as a man who prayed 5 times a day for decades, who fasted, who read, who believed. I am not asking you to abandon your faith. I am asking you to ask the same question I asked in that hospital room. Not a religious question, a desperate, honest, stripped down human question. If there is truly a healer, show me, ask it with your whole heart, and then be ready for the answer. Because I can tell you from 9 days of living on the other side of that question, the answer is not what any of us were taught to expect. And it is more than anything we were taught to hope for. To new believers, wherever you are in Iran, wherever you are in the world, you are not alone. What you have found is real. The one you have encountered is exactly who he showed you. He is. Hold on to that, no matter what it costs in the days ahead. Hold on to that face. My prayer requests are these. Pray for Shirin and her family. They do not yet know the full story of what happened in that room. Perhaps someday they will. I leave that in the hands of the one who healed her. Pray for the medical staff across Iran, the ones who are exhausted and frightened, and still showing up. Pray that the healer makes himself known to them in the middle of their work, the way he made himself known to me. Pray for Iran, not the government, not the military, the people, the ordinary, tired, frightened, resilient people who are waking up every morning in the middle of a war and trying to live their lives. Pray for me. I am still in Tehran. I do not know what the coming days hold. I do not know what it will mean professionally or personally or in terms of my safety when this testimony reaches the people it will reach. I am a 61-year-old doctor in a country at war, and I have just recorded a testimony that says, I saw Jesus Christ standing in the corner of a hospital room. I know what that will cost me. I also know what I saw, and I know that the one who stood in that room and said, I am the healer, is the same one who is holding every life in this city in hands that no war, no strike, no government, no weapon, and no disease has ever had the power to open. His name is Jesus. He was in my hospital. He healed my patient, and he found me.